Let's talk about life. Let's have a little conversation. Let's talk about life. Maybe learn a little information. Let's talk about life. And let's talk about life.
Hey, good morning. This is Valvoline Harity broadcasting from beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida. It's a glorious day, and we have a wonderful subject. I am so psyched up about For the Love of Dogs series. I just can't begin to talk about it. I mean, I can't begin to talk about it. I'm going to be talking about it probably for the next 6 months. So I hope you love doggies, because that's what we're going to be talking about. I have a wonderful guest today, somebody I know and who has this dog that I've always adored. You're gonna meet her in a minute, but first I want to talk about UPS on 2nd and 2nd. It's my sponsor, and it's a full-service UPS store. I want you to know that. I also want you to know it's open on Sundays now, so if you have any needs on a Sunday, just go on over to Joe at UPS at 2nd and 2nd. They have mailboxes. Get your passport photo taken. Of course, do all the shipping that you want, packing. They have, what's that person that authorizes things? Notary, thank you. Joe's a notary. And they're both very, very customer friendly. You can copy and fax and all kinds of things there. So if you have any of those needs, don't be shy. Go over to 2nd and 2nd and tell Joe you heard about him on Let's Talk Life, and he'll be happy to hear that. I also want to mention the New Barker, because it's a wonderful magazine, and I want to give it a little plug. And a new organization that's just coming up on the St. Pete scene called Safe Paws. And Safe Paws is pretty darn cool. They're a rescue group, but they're special. They do things a little bit different than the other rescue groups. So you'll be hearing more about them later too. Not on this show, but the next show. So here we are. We're in St. Pete. St. Pete is a doggy-loving community. Dogs are everywhere. And my favorite subject, and the one we're going to get on today with my special guest, is doggies that travel. And I've always been interested in travel. When I had little Miss Nina, it was a big deal when we traveled. She was very travel friendly. And some dogs they just take to it like water. So my guest today is Jayne Zampelli. And Jayne is a working mom. And I met Jayne at the Dolly Museum here. And we hit it off, and we took our little doggies out for doggy dates. Her little dog is a Chazzy, and she's a Shih Tzu, like Miss Nina was. And sometimes we'd walk together over at Vanoy Park by the harbor there in the basin. And you know, but they were both great company. Let's put it that way. And we had a lot of good conversations, and we've remained friends. And that's special to me. And Jayne was always very loving to Miss Nina, and that was special to me too. But why she's here today, because the thing that caught my eye on Facebook was a picture of her and her husband, who was a pilot, and there's Chazzy sitting in the cockpit of the plane. I said, oh my God, that little doggie's in that plane. And so I started asking her about travel. And I'm going to let her tell the stories, but this dog has been all over the world, for God's sake, and in a wonderful way. It was almost like when I was looking at the pictures, and it was one of those, where's Waldo? I mean, there was a little white dog somewhere in this picture, and it was Chazzy, and it was so cute. She's so cute. But I'm going to let Jayne, her mistress, talk about her. And also the relationship. We're going to go into a couple different segments, but right now we're going to stick with travel. And I want you to meet Jayne Zampelli. And I want you to say hi to my guests.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here and always, always happy to spend time with Velva. Yes, I am Chazzy's mother, and she is a very well-traveled dog, primarily because she has become an extension of our family, and everywhere we go, we take her. She's a very adventurous little dog. I'll say that I think I knew when I got her that the intent was for her to travel everywhere with us, so I very quickly started taking her with me everywhere in a little bag, just to kind of get her accustomed to being on travel and going out and about so that she wasn't scared when the time came for her to have to go under a seat or fly or travel. And I tell you, it paid off, because the first time I put her in an airplane, she didn't make a peep.
Now, describe her a little bit for my audience.
So Chazzy is a very independent, very reserved dog. I think it's her temperament as a Shih Tzu. She's not aggressive at all. If another dog comes up and tries to take her food or her toy, she kind of just lets them have it. So she's very, very laid back dog. But Rick's family refers to her as Princess Bratface. Because she comes across sometimes a little pretentious, but she's just a reserved little dog.
Well, she's pure white, and honestly, she does look like a princess. She does. And she's got that little ponytail on the top of her head with these pretty little bows in it and everything. She does look like a princess. So, that's okay. She is a princess.
She thinks she is one.
She's about 8-9 pounds.
She's 8 pounds. She's what we call an Imperial Shih Tzu, which they're a little bit smaller. She's not a toy. Imperial, there's nothing, really what it means is both of the parents, or my understanding from the breeder, is that both parents are 8 pounds and under. And if the parents are 8 pounds and under, typically the dog is going to be smaller, and they refer to them as Imperial because they're not a toy. So I'm not a subject matter expert on that, but when I got her, they said she was an Imperial Shih Tzu. So she's on the smaller side, but not a toy.
Yeah, but she's got the long hair. Like Miss Nina always had the puppy cut, but Chazzy has like the princess cut. That's all I can say. And her ears now. One of the reasons I gave Nina the puppy cut was because her ears kept getting in the food. But Chazzy is always spotless.
And she does not want. So if Chazzy takes a drink of water and it gets on her face, she will go and wipe her face off. So she's very particular about her cleanliness. So some of my friends that have Shih Tzus, if the dogs, are eating and they get water or food on their face, they go about and play and enjoy themselves. I mean, they're dogs. Chazzy is very upset about it. So she cleans up.
Okay. So tell us about the first time you actually took her somewhere. Now, I understand that you familiarized her with being outside and being in the little puppy bag and, that kind of a thing. And, so she was comfortable. But talk about some of the trips you took with her.
So I started just doing domestic travel because I don't live near family, and I would put her on flights. And the first time I took her, I was a little nervous because I didn't know how well she would do. And at the time, I wasn't familiar with the travel bags that are a little more ventilated. I mean, she was in a bag that was authorized for carrier, but she went under the seat and did fine. So I continued on with it. So it started off as just traveling to family. And before we knew it, we were taking her all over the country. I mean, we've taken her to Napa and San Francisco, and she's been to Ohio, and she's been to, then we took her to Italy. So just.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about that because, from Tampa, that's a long flight to Napa or San Francisco. Is she fine the whole flight?
I really attribute it to her being used to the bag. But there's typically a connection flight. And, a lot of the airports you'll find if you're, a little concerned about it, a lot of the airports have pet relief areas. Right. So as soon as we got off the plane, we would take her to the pet relief area and clean her little paws afterwards and give her some water and put her back in the bag.
And she was perfectly content. Okay. Did she sleep?
She did. And one thing I think that was comforting is in the bags that have the mesh is we would make sure my foot was near the bag so that she could smell my presence or Rick's presence.
That's what I did with Nina too. Yeah.
So that I think was a huge help. But yeah, even when food came through or anything, if we were eating, brought food on the plane, normally she's a beggar really bad. really bad, but she just did really well.
Okay, so now let's talk about Italy. How did you get her? How did you get her through customs and things like that?
So the different countries require different things depending on where you're going. So you have to check and find out what the country requires. In this case, we had to have a certain physical exam done, and she had to be microchipped. And one thing that we learned along the way was in Europe, the microchips that they're using are a different standard than what she had. Now she is almost 11 years old, but we had to, you either could have her microchipped again, or I found out you can rent a scanner and take it with you. And so we ended up renting a scanner versus putting her in for a new microchip. But they had to be microchipped and be able to be found with the country standard, and the passport was done through the vet.
So there was no more quarantine in European travel anymore?
England, London specifically, is really the only area that in the last several years I've known about that had a quarantine. And I think they've even kind of loosened their rules a little bit, but I'm not sure exactly what it is right now.
Okay, so here we are, this attractive couple with this gorgeous little doggie. How were you greeted in some of these countries?
They loved her. Because when we get on the ground, we typically unzip her little bag, and she a lot of times comes out. Sometimes she doesn't want to be bothered by the people, but I've had people come up to me and say they didn't even think she was real because she doesn't really move. She's very I can't explain it. She almost looks like a doll in there. She's very well behaved, and so they were excited to see her, but some people think she's a doll.
Well, she actually does look like a doll. Or I mean, seriously, that sometimes when I've seen some of her pictures, it does look like a stuffed toy, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think sometimes.
Yeah. She's got that look that, not that she's posing, but you could see where people would think that, So she's super cool, just very laid back doggy.
I think she is.
Yeah. Now, what about feeding? What about all the doggy necessities of life when you travel and you went to, let's say, Italy or San Francisco? Did you bring her bed and did you pack all her stuff?
Well, Chazzy sleeps with us. She's spoiled in that regard. So she knew she would sleep in our bed with us. We did bring her food and her water bowl. When we always pack her food because we don't know what we're going to get on the other end. But I will say, if you are planning to do any European travel, a lot of the European larger cities are dog friendly, and we were allowed to bring her into a lot of the restaurants.
Oh, wow.
She just couldn't sit up on the booth. So as long as we kept her under the table, as a matter of fact, I have pictures of her peeking out from under the tablecloth, as though she's not sure if she's allowed to be there.
Yeah.
We take her into gelaterias and get her ice cream. So she gets quite a few table scraps on that trip.
Yeah, I bet she did. Now, what about the other things like vets and emergencies and how much do you have to plan? I guess I'm asking.
I think because she's always just been healthy, we didn't really plan ahead with the vet situation, honestly. But again, she'd never had any issues, so we really didn't put a lot of thought into it. But it isn't a bad idea, actually, to think about that.
She could always get injured or something. You know what I mean? You never know. Mm-hmm. You never know in life.
No, you don't. You
don't. Yeah. You sent me some real interesting pictures. Tell me about some of the other trips. And talk about some advice you might want to share with people.
Okay. Well, I will say, when you're traveling, one thing to be aware of, I'll start with some of the travel advice. One thing that we learned, especially if you intend to do domestic travel, international travel, is a lot of the carriers. So in this case, for example, Italy, let's use that as an example. We were looking at flights we lived in St. Petersburg at the time, and we were looking at going to Rome. So initially we wanted to go from Tampa and take Delta to Miami and then fly into Rome. What we realized is if we took Delta, that we would have to change airlines to Alitalia, and what that meant was 2 different fees. So typically to travel domestic, if you're going to take your dog on a domestic flight from point A to point B, is going to be on average about $125.
Yes.
That's one way. Domestic, it was $200 and some dollars. So we were expected to pay $125 to Miami and then change airlines to Alitalia, which was affiliated with Delta, and then pay an additional $200 and some dollars. So when it's all said and done, we would have had to do that on the way there and on the way back.
Oh, my.
So what we found is that if you can find a carrier that carries you all the way through, we checked in Orlando, and I believe we flew United up to Baltimore, or I can't remember which. We connected somewhere in the United States. I think it was Baltimore, and then got back on a United flight. But because we didn't check back in with check into a different airline, the domestic fee applied for the duration of the travel to get there. Okay. So I would recommend really considering your travel and where you're going and checking into those fees, not just the country requirements, but also how much it's going to cost you. Did
you have to bring her documentation?
Yes. We got, I believe they called it a pet passport, but we found everything online and took it to the vet, and they certified everything, and we got the scanner for the chip, and we were good to go.
Okay. Well, you were pretty well prepared then, and since you're seasoned travelers, I suppose your gestalt or the energy around you, was helpful to calming the dog too.
Mm-hmm. I think so too.
Yeah, because after traveling with Nina a couple of times, I would put her under the seat, and like you, I had my foot by her little carrier, and there were a number of times when my seatmates didn't even, the trip is over and I pull her out, they, oh my God, there's a dog there. They didn't even know it. Mm-hmm. That's how quiet she was. But,
and the other thing that we do too, and a lot of people don't think about it, but you can't just walk into the airport with water, and dogs like a lot of water, especially if they're confined in that space. We found that when we would stop, Chazzy would want to drink. So we started bringing a bottle container, just so that when we get to the airport, now they have a lot of the bottle refill machines, but at the time we would go to a water fountain and fill it up so that we could make sure we had water and we weren't at the mercy of the crew. Because a lot of times if there's turbulence or something and you're waiting on them to bring water, it could be hours, especially for a domestic flight, and if your dog needs water, you think, oh, I didn't want to go and buy the $5 bottle of water at the airport, so you have the bottle.
So you bring the empty bottle.
Mm-hmm. Brought an empty travel bottle.
Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. Well, that's good advice, too.
So they don't get thirsty.
So tell me about some other cities. Now, what was Rome like for a dog?
She seemed to enjoy it, just because it was just different. I mean, the ability to go and enjoy, these ruins, to be able to go into restaurants. I think that was the highlight of her trip, was being able to go in and actually dine, in restaurants. Was
it dirty there? Were the streets dirty?
No, just older. I don't think that they were dirty. I mean, we were staying near Trevi Fountain and Spanish Steps and all that, and I really didn't feel it was dirty. It was just old, old city.
So you didn't worry about her catching anything or running into curs or anything like that,
New York City is where you got to worry. And she is a New York City girl. And Chazzy loves New York City. I'm sure you saw. I mean, I take her shopping with me, and she goes in her little bag and lays out in the lounges. I mean, she's a city girl, but she is white, and in the city, what a lot of people do, and I try to do for her too, she doesn't like it as much, is they put booties on their paws. Just to kind of keep their paws clean, because as you will see very quickly if you haven't been, the streets are very dirty in New York City. And another thing to consider is if you go to New York City, some dogs will not relieve themselves if they're not on grass. And there is not really a lot of grass. I mean, there aren't, it's not like your hotel's on Central Park. So if you're going to take your dog to New York City, be prepared to not have the grass area to walk them on. And if they have trouble going to the bathroom, that could be problematic.
Yeah.
Chazzy had to learn. It was a struggle for her initially because she had a house and a yard. And so the first time we took her there, she did not want to use the restroom on the sidewalk. Well, there was nowhere else for her to go. So it took her a little while to adjust, which was frustrating for us because we couldn't really leave the hotel until, she'd had a chance to use the restroom. So it can be a little bit concerning.
Okay. So I didn't know that about New York, but now that I'm sitting here thinking about New York, there isn't any grass unless you go to the Central Park. There just isn't.
And it's hard too with a smaller dog because it's so congested. So if you have a larger dog, you're not worried about someone stepping on them. But if you have a dog that's very reserved like Chazzy, they're just people everywhere. So it can be a little frightening at times.
It's really intense there. Very intense there. I would not, I didn't bring Nina there, but in situations like New York, I just wouldn't put her on the ground. First of all, she's blends right into the cement, and secondly, she's really tiny. So I would carry her. But that's interesting about New York. I never thought of that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, if you're in a tourist area in Midtown, there's a lot of food on the ground. So that's something to also be mindful of, is that, initially we had to keep a close eye on her, because if she sees a piece of a hot dog that fell from one of the hot dog stands, she's going to want to go after it. And there's just some really dirty things on the ground. So that's also one of those things that can be a major distraction when you're just trying to take your dog out and then go back to the hotel. It could take a while because they're sniffing already all the time, and now they're trying to pick stuff up.
Yeah. Now let's talk about doggy hotels for a minute. I've had my share of experiences. And what were your experiences in doggy hotels?
I'm a huge fan of the Kimpton boutique hotels. They're dog friendly and they don't charge you for the dogs, and they're boutique hotels, so they're really nice.
Say that name again.
Kimpton Boutique Hotels. So
that's a British. Isn't that a British chain?
I'm not really sure.
Kimpton.
It's Kimpton.
Kimpton. I've been in those hotels. I don't think it's an American chain, but go ahead.
Yeah, so the Muse is one that we use in New York City. There are a lot of them. They have some in San Francisco. We stay at the Sir Francis Drake in San Francisco. The Muse is the one we prefer in New York City, but they're very dog friendly. As a matter of fact, the first time I took Chazzy there to spend the night, when I showed up, they had a little food bowl in the entryway and a little chalkboard, and it said welcome, and it had Chazzy's name and another dog's name. And they had a pet concierge that sat up on a pillow. And I went up one time, another time I was visiting, and they gave her this beautiful plush dog bed.
Oh, my.
And it's not an outrageous hotel. I know it sounds very lavish, but it's just if you were, DC, they have Kimpton boutiques, but go to Kimpton.com. I would suggest that. I haven't stayed because I'm a Hilton girl now just because of what I do. But at the time, the last time I used them, they did not charge a pet fee.
Yeah, because I've paid pet fees, and not only do you pay the pet fee, they get you in the least attractive rooms. There's either a section of the hotel or a floor or something that's designated for animals, and so you're not only have to pay, you pay to be in a lower quality room.
I've seen that in Hilton's. Yes, I've seen
that's
that.
really bothered me. It just didn't seem right, Yep.
So
here you are now. You're in New York. Before we end, talk about another trip that she really liked, or you liked being with her. I think sometimes, truthfully, when I've traveled with Nina and stuff, I know when you kind of sense what a cool experience is for a dog. That, you know what I mean?
Yes.
When we drove down to Key West, there were certain stops I knew she would love. So are there some of those stories about Chazzy?
So Chazzy, we've done a lot of travel. So, and she seemed to really enjoy getting out and about. But I will tell you, one of the places we traveled to, and we eventually lived in Newport, Rhode Island. And I think the reason she loved that is the weather there is amazing. It's in New England. And the town of Newport is a vacation town, and it's very dog friendly. As a matter of fact, I have a picture of Chazzy drinking from the dog water fountain in, I think it's Queen Anne Square. And they have some of the restaurants, they'll say dog bar, and it has a little water bin, and they have, it's a very dog friendly town. And I would say that's probably her favorite because she wasn't just miserably hot. So they were welcoming. It wasn't too much people. There weren't too many people, but it was just enough to have the energy I think that she likes.
When you say the weather is wonderful there, why is the weather wonderful there?
Because it doesn't get really hot. I mean, there are maybe a month in the summer where it might get warm, but typically speaking, in the summer, September, I mean, it's just gorgeous, 60s.
Okay,
just
all right. Yeah, Shih Tzu weather.
Spring and fall. I mean, there's, again, in the summer, they get, maybe for a month, you might see some mid 80s, high 80s, but for the most part, it's beautiful weather.
Because I know Shih Tzus are heat intolerant.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So did that ever present a problem when you were traveling?
I don't think so. I mean, the only time it became an issue is if we, for example, we would take her out for breakfast with us in Napa, and it's dry heat, and it's not I wouldn't say it's always, she would sometimes get warm if she had to walk a little bit.
Okay.
But otherwise, traveling, she's in cabin, she's in cars. I mean, she seemed fine, but sometimes it would present an issue when it's a dry heat like that.
Okay. So she travels well in a car.
Mm-hmm. She has a seatbelt.
She has a seatbelt.
Mm-hmm.
Miss Nina had a seatbelt too. No, she hated it. But she hated anything that restricted her.
No.
No.
She just, we started using that seatbelt, probably when she was maybe 4 or 5 years old. So she wasn't a puppy. And we were kind of concerned that she was going to whine or throw a fit, but she didn't. And we were happy not only because of the safety aspect of it, but because she is a beggar. And when we would go travel somewhere and pull through to grab some food through a drive-through, she would jump up in the front. So not only is it safe for her, it's safe for us.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I appreciate you sharing all this, and I like the travel tips too. And is there any place before we end that you would not take her?
I really can't think of any place, honestly.
Would you take her to India?
Oh, internationally speaking, I mean, yeah, there are probably some places that I don't know how she would be received. I mean, I'm comfortable with traveling with her in places that I've been, that I'm confident that there won't be any issues, because I would never leave her anywhere if there was a problem. So. Yeah. But I can't specifically, think of a specific country.
Okay. Well, this is great. Thank you, Jayne, so very, very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I'm going to tell my viewers that you may hear Jayne's voice again, because Chazzy has a brother, and Jayne's little boy has a sister, and that's a whole nother story that we're not going to go into today. But I think it's very interesting. I found it very interesting about a dog as part of a family, and more than part of a family, totally integrated, and it's a very interesting story. And the way the little fellow and Chazzy get along is very interesting. So, but we're going to end today because this is Doggy Travel Week, and I really appreciate you coming and sharing.
Happy to be here.
And thank you so very much. We're signing off. This is Valvoline Harity, and this is Let's Talk Life, and this is UPS 2nd and 2nd South. Don't forget to go, okay? You'll love it, I promise you. Thank you. Here's our theme song. Talk to you soon.
Let's talk about life. Let's have a little conversation. Let's talk about life. Maybe learn a little information. Let's talk about life. And let's talk about love.